This is the Provoked Prawn, and this is the Royal Kludge RK84. In this video, I'm going to be showing you what's included in the box, and then I'm going to go through an upgrade process, swapping out the keycaps and the key switches to result in a more satisfying action, but also to show you how to do it, why you can do it, what you can do with the board, and more. The RK84 is an 80% keyboard, which gives you 84 keys in a compact frame. So you have a small and compact keyboard with an interesting layout that still includes directional arrows, things like home, page up, page down, end, etc., as well as a number of other things built into it. Now, this keyboard comes with a Hotswappable design, which works with 3 and 5 pin switches, so you can customize it with all manner of switches. More on that later on. It's a compact wireless gaming keyboard that's designed to work in several different modes. So it has a USB-C connection. You'll see that cable in the box in a minute. But it also works with 2.4 gigahertz wireless and also Bluetooth 5.0. So you have a number of different options for connecting it to your PC and using it. Now, I've gone for the brown switch setup here. Royal Kludge was kind enough to get in touch and asked me if I'd be interested in doing an unboxing or review video on this, and gave me an option to choose between brown switches, blue switches, and red switches. They're similar to Cherry MX in the sort of style of them. The browns have a nice balance with a 55 gram actuation force and 2mm actuation distance. And I must say, actually, out of the box, as standard, as you can see it here, it's a very nice keyboard. It's comfortable, the keys are tactile but not too loud, and it's got a good actuation to it. Very good for gaming and typing on, really satisfying actually. I was really surprised because this is a reasonably affordable keyboard. You have buttons on the underside to switch between Bluetooth and wireless mode and turn it on and off. And you'll see there's also a little dock for the 2.4 gigahertz wireless dongle there as well. It's got a 3750 milliamp battery, so you can use it for quite some time when in wireless mode, so that's obviously a bonus. Now, there are a number of RGB lighting effects that I'll show you briefly. They're included in here as 21 onboard RGB backlight profiles, and you can adjust the brightness and speed and style of them by using the function key, and then the directional arrows and the home and end buttons on the keyboard. And I'll show a close-up of that in a minute. It's available in 2 different variations, either black or white. Obviously, I've got the white one here, and I think it's nice looking. The other things that are included in the box is you have these little magnetic feet that you can put on the bottom. Obviously, allows you to adjust the angle of it and change that. So it goes between 8 and 12 degrees in terms of the angle. I mostly used it without them, I'll be honest. These clip on really nicely and easily, but they also slide around a little bit. So I didn't find it was a perfect fit, but also I just prefer it to be flat on the desk because I find it a bit more comfortable. And the angle of it is also really good. It's for everyday typing. I've been using this for gaming and for typing all day long on, and found it satisfying. The USB-C cable is nothing fancy, but when I turned it over to plug it in, I found that it has 2 pass-through ports on it as well. So you can plug the keyboard into your PC, and then you can use USB pass-through to plug in your mouse or other devices to it. So it's pretty good. What you're seeing is a compact keyboard with a multitude of features on it. A really rich keyboard and brilliant option. Not particularly expensive, and yet you're getting a comfortable, easy to type on, feature-rich keyboard with loads of lighting options, the pass-through, obviously the Bluetooth and wireless connectivity as well. And it also has the option for swapping out the switches. Now, included in the box, you get some extra switches of your choice. So obviously, if you've chosen the brown one, as I have, you get brown switches, just a handful of extras, and you get this cap puller and key switch puller that you can use to take the caps off and then pull out the switches. It's hot swappable, which means that you can do this while it's plugged in, but obviously for the most part you probably won't be doing that, but you can change it out with either 3 or 5 pin switches, which gives you the option to choose from a variety of different switches out there and customize the feel of it. It's really easy to do as well. This puller obviously just hooks underneath the keycaps, and then you can just yank them out, and then you swap it around and pull out the key switches. So I'm going to show you the process for doing this. And it is really straightforward. Now, the keycaps themselves aren't anything particularly special. The other side of them's kind of yellow. They don't look very fancy, but I wasn't expecting anything super fancy, to be honest, with their setup. but they are still nice enough and reasonably nice to type on too. You obviously have all the different extra secondary actions labeled on the switches, so you can see there's a variety of them, and you'll see a close-up of that and again in a minute. You have the option to upgrade to other keycaps, and I have done so, and I'll show you that in the description. Now, a close-up look at the standard key switches, you'll see that they have RK written on them for the Royal Kludge logo. I don't know whether these are made by them or made by Kailh or Gateron. They're very similar to Kailh's, and as I said, these are the brown switches. There are red variations, which are the ones you want to get if you're big into gaming, and then blue is a lot clickier, and they're obviously for typing on. But you have the option to swap out what's completely different. You can see a close-up look at the PCB, and you'll see where the pins go. So you have the setup for either the 3 pins, which is with 2 actual connections, and the middle one, or 5 pins, which a lot of other switches use. So this is great because it gives you a lot more customization options. When you're installing the switches, it's worth watching out for all those pins though, because it is very easy to accidentally bend the pins when inserting them, and then you just take them out and straighten them up again and you won't have an issue. And a close-up look at the stabilizers, because I think that's worth covering off. Some of the switches obviously are larger, like the shift key and the enter key and things like that, and require a little bit of stabilization to stop them wobbling around and making quite so much noise. You'll see there's a bit of a plastic affair here, quite a bit of play and travel in it, so not particularly fancy, but what I did find is they don't rattle around as much as your standard sort of metal pin stabilizers, so they're actually quite a bit quieter, and it's reasonably nice. As I said, as standard, this is fairly nice to type on, so here's an example of that in action. Quite a satisfying setup with the brown switches. Quiet, pleasant enough, easy enough to type on, and responsive as well. But I wanted to change it out and do something a little bit different, so I'll show you some of that in a second. But what I want to do now is give you a close-up look at the keycaps. You'll note there are some functions buried in the F row. So for example, you have media playback buttons in F6 to F12. You also have the ability to open apps and do various other things in here and access all sorts of other things. The actions are also just accessible by just pressing the function key. So although you have a compact keyboard, you then have the ability to do all sorts of things. You'll see down by the directional arrows that you can adjust the brightness and the direction of the RGB lighting, and it's easy enough to also change the schemes of those. One of the things that was really difficult to do justice is the RGB lighting effects. There are 21 different effects buried in here, but when I tried to catch them on camera, they look like they're flickering. So if you see any weird oddities with flickering effects here, it's actually from the camera and that capturing of it. I tried adjusting the camera settings, but it was still doing it. I'm not seeing this with other keyboards, but my point is, in real life, it doesn't have this effect where it looks like a strobing. It's certainly not doing that. Now, for the upgrade purposes, I actually had a number of different switch options because I'm planning on building several different keyboards at the moment. And you'll see the Royal Kludge brown keys here, and then I have Kailh's box Jades, which are a lot louder. Now, over at kbdfans.com, I purchased a switch tester which comes with a multitude of different switches in it, and I have listed them out in the description so you can see. I'd recommend, if you don't know what switches to buy, buying something like this with a tester kit will give you an idea of what sort of key switches you like in terms of the sound and the response. This obviously allows you to test out what it's like to use, and because the keyboard's Hotswappable, you can buy something like this which is relatively affordable, try out each of the keys and see which one is your preference. So I'm going to give you a sound test and sample of what this is like with this setup, and then show you a bit more. you'll see there's quite a big difference between these switches. And I also bought some other ones that were separate from this kit. That includes Kailh's Novelkeys Blueberry switches, which is the blue ones that you can see. The ZEAL Tealios V2s and ZEAL Sakurios silent linear switches as well. So I had a variety of different options to try out here and to work out which one I wanted to use, also just to test them out. But what I actually ended up doing is using Novelkeys Creams, which are going to be lubed in a second. I'll show you the process for lubing, but I'm also going to add a link in the description to a video from Teho Types on how to lube key switches, which you should find useful if you're interested in doing it. But just to show you the difference between them, you can hear the Jade box switches here from Kailh against the standard brown ones included. You'll note that just the noise levels off of these are very noisy switches indeed. And Novelkeys Creams, by comparison, are a linear switch, which are very comfortable and also quieter. And they are a touch quieter than the brown switches that are included in standard, and even more so when lubed. And so the process for lubing does take quite some time and does require a little bit of extra kit. But I wanted to play around and show you how to do this. So first of all, we're going about removing the keycaps and then removing the key switches. And then we have this key switch dismantler, which is basically a little tool, which I purchased as a kit from Amazon. And I'll link to that in the description. I'll let you take the switches apart. Now, the Kailh switches, these Novelkeys Cream switches, are linear and they're not terribly fancy looking, but they are respected and one of the most sought after linear switches out there. So they're very popular, and they do actually still let the RGB lighting through despite not having that clear housing on top. So it's worth noting that, and you'll see a bit more of how that works at the end. The switch tool for dismantling these actually works really well as well. You just put the bit at the bottom, so you have the 4 clips within the 4 prongs, and then you push gently from the top with the other part of this. This tool's really handy for taking the switch apart. Basically what we're going to do is take the switch apart and split it into its various different parts. You then need to use some lube in order to add a little bit of moisture to the relevant parts, and that will allow for a smoother action and more satisfying action when pressing the switches, and also just quieten down a bit more as well. So we are lubing the internals. As I said, I'll link to a video in the description which will give you more information on how to do this, but basically a little bit of lube applied to each switch on the internal housing, round on the either side, on the leaf that does the action, around the middle as well. This requires a lot of time and patience, especially when you think you have to do 84 keys. So you're going through the process of lubing each of these parts individually and carefully making sure to apply only a small amount of lube to each of the sections. We're not lubing the entire thing either. So make note of what I'm doing and you'll get the right sort of action in terms of the amount that you're applying and where to applying it to. Once you've put the switch back together, you'll then have a much nicer action as well. This isn't essential for setting up the keyboard in this way. You could just buy these switches and use them as they are, and I'll be honest, they sound fantastic as they are as well. And I think over time, once they're bedded in a bit more, they probably sound even better. But the process is one that's done by the keyboard community and it's worth trying out, and I thought it was worth experimenting with and seeing what difference it made to this keyboard. And the end result is really nice, as you'll see at the end and here. And actually, there's a little bit of a good therapeutic action to do in this process because it's quite a mundane task. So in this part, you can see that I'm lubing the springs. You lube both ends of the springs. We've lubed the leaf at the bottom and we've lubed the top switch bit as well. And you're making sure you're putting it back together in the same way. So the 2 little prongs on the front of that are facing towards the leaf, and that will then push the leaf and actuate it when you press on the top. We're then putting the housing back together and sticking it all back down. One of the things that I found with this process is you need to make sure that you have the logo facing the right way so that it all clips in together nicely, and also that you push it back so the 4 little pins that are holding it all together are actually clipped together properly, because otherwise you'll have trouble seating it on the PCB and you won't be able to get it back into the keyboard as easily. So it's worth bearing that in mind. And just a little sound test to show the difference between lubed and unlubed. See if you can tell me which one's which. initially it doesn't sound like there's much difference between them, but once you've done the whole lot and you install them on the keyboard, you really start to notice the difference and how much of an impact this has. So now we're repeating that process again, and I'm obviously not going to show you the entirety of it, but I am going to show you some of the steps that I went through. I also purchased a lube station from Amazon, which basically allows you to dismantle the switches and then lay them all out en masse to do as many switches as possible at one go. I actually found that this was better just for the top parts and for the springs, and I ended up doing most of it by hand at the end. If you want to see a video of me doing this without talking, I'll link to my ASMR channel, and you can check that out. I've done an hour-long session of this where I literally just captured me doing all the different parts and lubing it up ready for action. Now, once I was done, I went about the process of installing these switches, and it was at this point I realised I hadn't actually purchased enough of the Novelkeys creams. But this actually pays off, because then that gives me a chance to use the other switches that I bought. So the ZEAL Tealios V2s and the ZEAL Rosélios, and also those Jade box switches, and actually end up with a Jade box switch on my escape key as well as the function row. And there's something quite satisfying about having a loud escape key when the majority of your other keys are quiet and silent. Now, the ZEAL key switches are linear and comfortable as well, and I'd certainly recommend those. If you search online, you'll find most people that love good keyboard setups recommend either Novelkeys Creams or those ZEAL key switches, and they are very nice indeed. Now I'm installing the Coral Sea key switch set. So it's basically a oriental style set with a variety of different colors in it, and also some nice accents. I really like this one for the simple effects of the different colors, and also like the whale at the bottom on the spacebar, for example. And we now have a fully modified keyboard which still works in the same way. Obviously, one downside to doing this is you lose the accents for the secondary actions, so you have to remember what happens when you press the function key. But the end result is a really nice looking keyboard that hopefully, as you'll agree, sounds nice too. You hear the difference between the standard Novelkeys creams that I've lubed and installed at the bottom row, and then the very loud box shades at the top. And the RGB lighting effects still work nicely as well, so you still have some RGB lighting bleeding through there. Unfortunately, you still see some of that strobing, but as I said, this doesn't happen in real life. It's just on camera for some reason. This has been the Provoked Prawn. I hope you enjoyed this video. Be sure to check out the description for all the links and other information you need to know. Thanks for watching. This has been the Provoked Prawn. Hope you found this video useful, interesting, hilarious, or otherwise. Take a look at these other videos that I think you might find interesting as well, and have a look at the description for links and other information you might find useful. Click that join button to see the benefits of being a member of my YouTube channel, and most importantly, have a great life.